bustling street in a small American town, the setting sun bathed the sidewalks in a warm orange glow. The town hummed with its usual rhythm. Vendors called out their offers from stalls. Families strolled leisurely with their children, and cars rolled by with a low hum. Amidst this lively scene, 2 white police officers patrolled the central district on horseback, casually observing passers-by. Their attention was suddenly drawn to a black man standing near the window of an upscale store. Dressed in a dark leather jacket and jeans, he held a tablet in his hands, his expression calm but focused on the screen. One of the officers, a man in his 40s with a sharp face and cold eyes, slowed his horse and nodded to his partner. "Look over there," he muttered. "Doesn't seem right. What's he doing just standing there? And that store looks a bit too fancy for him." His partner, a broader man with a thick mustache, smirked. "Let's check it out. Bet he's planning something shady." The officers dismounted and approached the man. He only acknowledged them when one of the officers called out gruffly, "Hey you, what are you doing here?" The black man looked up, meeting their gaze with calm dignity. "I'm looking for an address," he said, his voice steady. "Checking the map on my tablet." The officer smirked, stepping closer and towering over him. "An address, huh? You look more like a thief than a tourist. Let me see your ID." The man nodded and handed over his identification without hesitation. It was a federal access badge, a credential marked with an official seal and insignia, clearly indicating a high-level role. The officers glanced at it briefly, ignoring its significance. No driver's license, no passport. What's this supposed to be?" One officer sneered, passing it to his partner. "Look at this. He can't even show a proper ID." The other officer added, examining the badge as if it were meaningless. The black man frowned slightly, but maintained his composed tone. "That's my federal badge. Run it through your system and you'll understand." But the officers dismissed his words. One of them waved his hand dismissively. "Don't tell us how to do our job. We'll figure it out. Let's take you down to the station." Before the man could protest, one of the officers pulled out a thick leather strap, wrapping it around the man's wrists like a makeshift leash, doing it publicly and with deliberate showmanship. "You're walking with us. No need to get our hands dirty," the officer said with a chuckle, and his partner laughed along. Onlookers began to notice the spectacle. People slowed their steps, turning to watch. Some pulled out their phones, filming the scene. The officers seemed to enjoy the attention, exchanging smug glances as they tugged on the strap. "Come on, show everyone who's in charge here," one of them jeered. The black man closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if calming himself, before opening them with a composed yet piercing gaze. His voice was low but firm. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The officers burst out laughing at his remark. "Oh yeah, sure, let me guess. You're the president or something?" one quipped, tugging the leash tighter. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Some older passers-by shook their heads in disapproval, but no one dared to intervene. The tension in the air thickened as the black man, unshaken, stood tall. He seemed to be waiting for something, confident that the truth would soon reveal itself. The crowd on the street continued to grow. Drawn by the commotion, people stopped to watch, trying to figure out what was happening. The black man, his hands bound by the makeshift leather strap, walked slowly but with unwavering dignity despite the jeers from the white officers. One of them would occasionally jerk the strap, forcing him to move faster. "Keep it moving. Or do you think you're royalty standing here like that?" one officer sneered. "Maybe he needs a crown to feel at home," the other added with a chuckle, provoking another burst of laughter. The man remained silent. His steps were measured and his gaze steady, but the humiliation was palpable. Cameras from passers-by were now recording the scene, capturing every word and gesture. Among the onlookers, murmurs of discontent started to ripple through the crowd. "This is disgusting," exclaimed an elderly woman, elegantly dressed, her face flushed with anger. "They're treating him like an animal. Is this the 21st century or the Middle Ages?" "What do you expect? He probably did something to deserve it," a younger man in the crowd muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Even if he did, there are laws. This is something entirely different," the woman retorted, her eyes fixed on the officers. Among the grumbles of outrage were a few voices attempting to justify the officers' actions. "Maybe he stole something," a man in a baseball cap suggested. "Let him learn what it's like to get caught." One middle-aged woman, clearly upset, decided to step forward. She approached the officers, attempting to block their path. "What are you doing? This is outrageous," she shouted. "Why are you treating him like this? Don't you have any sense of honor?" The officers stopped. One of them looked at her with disdain. "This isn't your business, ma'am. We're doing our job, keeping order." "Keeping order?" she shot back. "You're humiliating him just because he's different from you. Do you really think this is right?" "Oh, look, we've got ourselves a human rights defender," the second officer sneered. "Want to join him? We've got another strap right here." These words triggered louder murmurs of indignation in the crowd, but no one dared to step closer. The black man paused, turning his head slightly to address the woman. His voice was calm, almost reassuring. "Thank you. But don't worry. This will all come to light soon." The woman nodded, though tears glistened in her eyes. Slowly she stepped back, realizing there was little she could do at that moment. Meanwhile, one of the officers pulled out his phone and, laughing, snapped a selfie with the restrained man in the background. "Check it out, guys. A new meme in the making," he said, showing the photo to his partner. "Perfect. Let's caption it. Street King caught." The other officer laughed, clearly enjoying the moment. The black man remained impassive. His composure began to unsettle some of the onlookers. Why wasn't he protesting? Why wasn't he defending himself? The crowd didn't understand that he was waiting for the moment when the truth would turn the tide. By the time they reached the intersection, the officers paused to wait for the light to change. This gave the crowd a chance to gather even closer. Some began posting videos of the scene online, accompanied by shocked comments. "This is so humiliating. How is this even happening? In 2024, and this is still happening? Does anyone know who this man is? Why is he just taking it?" The officers ignored the whispers and recording phones. One of them, trying to squeeze in one last joke, smirked and said, "Hey, you like being the center of attention? Look around, you're a star. Maybe you should start signing autographs." The crowd grew silent, waiting for the man's reaction, but he simply turned his head to the officer, his gaze piercing and confident. For a moment, the officer's smirk faltered. He looked uncertain, as though he'd realized too late that something wasn't right. But he quickly masked it with his usual arrogance and jerked the strap again, forcing the man to move. The tension in the crowd continued to build. People couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Yet the man walked on, his head held high, knowing that the moment of truth was near. His silence was louder than any words he could have spoken. The procession of two white officers leading the black man by a leather strap moved steadily toward the town square. The crowd had swelled to a considerable size, with people stopping to record, murmur, and debate what they were witnessing. Voices of discontent mingled with confusion, and the officers, who had been grinning moments ago, began to notice the growing unease in the air. The black man, still composed and silent, exuded an aura of unshakable confidence. His expression, calm but focused, seemed to suggest he knew that justice was not far away. Meanwhile, the officers maintained their bravado, oblivious to the consequences rapidly approaching. "Look at this audience," one officer quipped, tugging on the strap for effect. "Maybe he should start his own show. The crowd's loving it." "Yeah," the second officer laughed. "Too bad his next gig's gonna be behind bars." At that moment, their radios crackled to life. A voice from dispatch cut through the noise, sharp and authoritative. "Unit 14, what's your status? We've got reports of a detainment. What's going on out there?" The first officer picked up the radio casually, his tone dripping with nonchalance. "All under control, sir. We've detained a suspicious individual near the shopping district. He's cooperating." A pause followed, and the dispatcher's voice returned, now firmer. "Clarify. Who have you detained? Name?" The officers exchanged a glance, their earlier confidence flickering. Begrudgingly, one of them pulled out the ID badge they had dismissed earlier. Squinting at it, he read the name aloud into the radio. Robert Jackson. What came next was a thunderous silence, followed by the dispatcher's voice, now edged with panic and urgency. "You've detained Robert Jackson? Do you have any idea what you're doing? Release him immediately. That's the Secretary of Homeland Security. Report back to the station for a full debrief now." The words landed like a bombshell. The officers froze, their faces draining of color. The crowd, overhearing the radio exchange, broke into loud murmurs. Did he just say Homeland Security? That guy? No way. Wait, that's Robert Jackson? The Robert Jackson? The black man who had remained silent until now finally spoke. His voice was calm with a trace of irony. I tried to warn you, but it seems you weren't listening. One officer, still holding the strap, quickly released it as if it had burned his hand. He stammered, Sir, this was all just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Jackson's sharp gaze pierced him. Was it? Or was it something else entirely? Tell me, what exactly made me suspicious in your eyes? The officer struggled to form words, but Jackson didn't wait for an answer. I'll let your superiors handle that. For now, I think we're done here. The crowd, sensing the shift in power, began cheering. Phones captured every moment, and videos flooded social media with captions like, "Justice served," and "When karma hits back." The dispatcher's voice broke through the radio again, now commanding and resolute. Officers, you are ordered to escort Secretary Jackson to his destination immediately. Leave your horses and report to the station for further instructions. And for your sake, I hope you're prepared to explain yourselves. One officer mumbled a shaky, "Yes, sir," into the radio, while the other avoided eye contact altogether. Meanwhile, Jackson walked to the waiting car sent for him. He glanced back at the officers, his expression unreadable. "Next time," he said, his tone sharp but calm, "think twice about how you treat people. You never know who they might be." The crowd erupted into applause as Jackson entered the car. For many, it was a moment of poetic justice, an arrogant abuse of power undone by its own hubris. As the car pulled away, the officers stood frozen in the square, surrounded by a now hostile crowd. Their careers, reputations, and futures hung in the balance. The truth had come to light, and the world was watching. Back at the station, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The two white officers sat at a long table in the briefing room, their earlier arrogance now replaced with visible fear and regret. Across from them, Robert Jackson, Secretary of Homeland Security, stood with a calm but imposing presence. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning, but the weight of the situation hung heavily in the air. On the table before them lay a stack of photographs and social media screenshots, images of the officers jeering, pulling the strap, and even taking selfies with their captive. Videos showing the incident had gone viral, accompanied by hashtags like #JusticeForAll and #AccountabilityMatters. The station's phone lines were jammed with calls from media outlets demanding answers. Jackson picked up one of the photographs, examining it with quiet intensity. Then, looking directly at the officers, he finally spoke. "Let's start with the basics," he said, his tone sharp and steady. "Explain to me how this—" He held up the photo of the officers laughing as they led him down the street. "Fits into your duty to protect and serve." The officer with the mustache cleared his throat, his voice shaky. "Sir, we thought you looked suspicious. We didn't know who you were, and we acted based on the situation." "Suspicious?" Jackson interrupted, his voice laced with cold precision. "And what exactly made me suspicious? Was it the way I was standing? The fact that I was checking a map on my tablet? Or was it something else?" The officer fell silent, unable to respond. His partner shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding Jackson's gaze. Jackson let the silence stretch, then leaned forward slightly. "You didn't know who I was," he said, his voice quieter but no less firm. "And that's exactly the problem. Because if you did know, you wouldn't have dared to act this way. But the truth is, it shouldn't matter who I am. No one should be treated the way you treated me." The officers lowered their heads, their confidence completely shattered. Jackson continued, "You didn't just embarrass yourselves today. You humiliated your department. You betrayed the public trust. And worst of all, you sent a message to the people of this town that power in the wrong hands can be dangerous." One of the officers finally mustered the courage to speak. "Sir, we're sorry. We didn't mean for it to go this far. It was a mistake." Jackson straightened up, his expression unreadable. "A mistake," he repeated, the word heavy with meaning. "That's a convenient way to describe something so deliberate. You took pride in what you were doing. You laughed. You posed for photos. Tell me, would you have considered it a mistake if no one had been watching?" Neither officer answered. The silence spoke volumes. Later that evening, a press conference was called at the town hall. Reporters crowded the room, their cameras trained on the podium. Jackson stepped forward, his calm demeanor commanding attention. Today's events highlight a problem that extends far beyond two individuals, he began, his voice steady but resolute. This is about accountability, about the values we expect from those entrusted to enforce the law. And it's about ensuring that no one, regardless of who they are, is treated as less than human. Reporters' hands shot up with questions. Secretary Jackson, will the officers face charges? What steps will be taken to prevent this in the future? Do you believe this incident reflects systemic issues? Jackson answered with measured clarity. The officers involved have been suspended pending a full investigation. Additionally, this department will undergo comprehensive training to address implicit bias, ethics, and professionalism. This is not just about punishment, it's about making sure incidents like this never happen again. The room buzzed with murmurs as Jackson continued. This is not just my story. It's a story about every person who has ever been judged unfairly, treated with disrespect, or denied their dignity. We must do better, as individuals, as institutions, and as a society. The press conference was broadcast nationwide. On social media, messages of support poured in for Jackson's measured response and call for reform. Meanwhile, the two officers became symbols of abuse of power, their actions dissected and condemned in public discourse. That night, as Jackson prepared to leave the town, he sat quietly in the backseat of his car, reflecting on the day's events. His assistant, seated next to him, broke the silence. "You handled that incredibly well, sir. The message was clear and people are listening." Jackson nodded, looking out at the dimly lit streets as they passed by. "Justice isn't just about punishment," he said thoughtfully. "It's about making people think, about changing the way we see and treat each other. If today's events can spark even a small shift, then maybe it wasn't all in vain." The car turned a corner, and the town square came into view. A group of locals still stood there, holding signs with messages like "Dignity for all" and "Accountability matters." Jackson allowed himself a faint smile as the car drove on. The incident with Robert Jackson became a catalyst for change. The town implemented new training programs for its officers, and conversations about accountability and respect echoed far beyond its borders. For Jackson, it wasn't just about one victory. It was about paving the way for a better, fairer future.